Gary, thanks for joining. Thanks for being on today.
I'm really pumped to be here, man. And I've had a great journey with both of you guys, too, which is it makes it even better. Put that little
disclaimer right there.
Well, I gotta ask you, because for a lot of people that don't know about you, you started in the mortality space.
Yeah, I was a mortality expert for large life insurance, which meant that if we got 10 years of medical records on you and 10 years of demographic data, we could tell the insurance company how long you had to live to the month. And it's funny because I get a lot of flack for that.
How accurate? That's
extraordinarily accurate. I mean, mortality science is some of the most accurate science in the world. I mean, there are big companies that do it, Fasano and Associates, American Viatical Services. There are large companies that essentially aggregate data. But if you think about life insurance, life insurance companies have data that virtually no other financial services enterprise has, right? No collegiate university, no research foundation, not even the federal government. They have specific information on the day, the date, the time, the location, and the cause of death for hundreds of millions of lives. And so when you pull that back into somebody's medical record and back into their demographic data, you start to see what kind of lifestyle choices, what kind of mortality factors, how does living with being morbidly obese, affect your chances of longevity? What does hypertension really do? What does hypercholesterolemia really do? What do certain chemicals and synthetics and pharmaceuticals, what is their trajectory and their impact on health? And, big data gives us massive amounts of information on how humanity is performing. And, I began to realize looking at this big data that most of us are not living healthier, happier, longer lives because of what we used to call more modifiable risk factors. So had I been able to just contact that client, which I was prohibited from doing by law, and just speak to them and give them some of the data that I had on their blood work or their genetics or their diet or their lifestyle, it would have made a demonstrative change in the trajectory of their life.
Wow. So tell me about that, because with all that data, what are the main causes for death?
So the leading cause of all-cause mortality is sedentary lifestyle. Sitting is the new smoking. I mean, sedentary lifestyle is the leading cause of all-cause mortality. This is why I say that sitting is the new smoking. Right? Because, the less we move, the less we breathe, the less oxygen we have, the more fertile we are for all forms of disease and pathology. I often say that the presence of oxygen is the absence of disease.
Wow. Yeah.
And I don't think anything is more truthful than that statement. Right? I mean, if you look at mood and emotional state, it all requires a high oxidative state in the blood, right? That's why no human being has ever woken up laughing. Right? You don't have the oxidative state to experience laughter, but you can wake up angry because anger, despair, jealousy, resentment, these low tier emotions don't actually require oxygen as a part of their structure. And so, very often, if you look at aging, one of the things that we would look at is we would look at something called the hypoxic curve, which was how well at any age were you managing oxygen? How well were you transporting it? What kind of red blood cell count did you have? What kind of hemoglobin level did you have? We would get data on people and we would say, this person is on a steep hypoxic curve, meaning they are managing oxygen very poorly, which has a lot to do with how much you mobilize, it's called ambulation, how much you ambulated. And the less mobile you were and the less your oxidative state, the easier it was to predict the onset of, the severity of, and how quickly you would succumb to disease. Pathology.
So let's talk about that, because Robert and I, before we got in here today, we were talking about let's bring the energy up, right? And one of the first exercises that we did, what was it?
Breathwork.
I love it. We're always having this question: how do we increase our energy levels? Is it as simple as doing some breath work?
Yeah, so when you say something like energy, I just converted to physiology. So when you say energy, what you're really referring to is the amount of oxygen in your blood. So if you told me, Gary, I had a lot of energy today, physiologically what you're saying is I had a lot of oxygen in my blood today. So if oxygen equals energy, which it does, then if we want to raise our energy level, right, without a stimulant, without an amphetamine, caffeine, I'm talking about natural energy, healthy cognitive function, deep sleep, then you want to raise the oxidative state of the body. Right? And so what carries oxygen in the blood? A red blood cell. And what does it carry oxygen in? It carries it inside of a fluid called hemoglobin. So anything that would lead to lower red blood cell count or lower hemoglobin would be one of the things that robs you of your energy. I mean, this is the reason why people that are the most exhausted sleep the worst.
Oh.
Right? So, if you ask a physician that
Right
question,
here.
yeah, right? So,
I'm exhausted. I'm like, why can't I go to bed? Like,
Yeah.
there's times where I literally, in my head, I'm like, you can fall asleep right on this couch, and my mind's racing for hours.
so that's something different. We should talk about that too, because the majority of people have, in the mortality space, one of the really interesting discoveries that kept leaping out, out of these charts and out of these spreadsheets at me was that the majority of the reason why people are not living healthier, happier, longer lives is because of something called modifiable risk factors, right? We just talked about that. Meaning if they could make slight changes, they could completely change the trajectory of their life. And one of them is that we don't get data on our bodies. We don't get data on our temple. And if you were to ask probably every one of your audience members watching this podcast, what's more important, your health or your wealth? What's more important, your health or your business? They're going to say their health. But then when you look at their priorities, right? So health might be their goal, but it's not their priority. Their business is their priority, and priorities take precedence over goals. And so what happens is our health gets pushed further and further and further down the track until it makes itself a priority.
Can I question you on that? Because
Yeah.
I feel like, at least for me, it was over, let's say your 20s, right? You're drinking, you're partying, you're having fun, you're going through college, you're trying to find your first job. Then your 30s, you're serious about a job, you start making money, and then 40s, family life, it changes completely, takes a different turn. When would you say that you start seeing people really taking their health more seriously and don't just put it on the back burner, but more front and center?
Sadly, the most of the people take their health serious when they have some kind of catastrophic event in their life or in the life of somebody very close to them, right? And so some kind of diagnosis of chronic disease, God forbid a tragic event, and it wakes them up to the importance of their own health. I mean, one of the things I think we got positively out of the pandemic, no matter what side of that equation you fall on, pro-vaccine, anti-vaccine, what have you, was that people understood the value of being healthy, right? I mean, the leading causes of morbidity in COVID were also modifiable risk factors: morbid obesity, type 2 diabetes, clinical deficiency in vitamin D3. And as we did more and more research on human beings, we realized that, so many of us are accepting these small nagging consequences that are robbing us of our focus, our mental energy, the depth of our sleep, our weight gain or water retention, our response to exercise, our short-term recall. And we chalk all these things up to a consequence of aging, right? Or stress or our environment. It's not a consequence of any of those things. It's a consequence of missing raw material in the human body. And if you get data on your body, you can hunt for that missing raw material and you can put it back and you will thrive in ways you never thought possible. The majority of disease and pathology is not something that happens to us. It is something that happens within us. So for example, when I was in grad school, I always tell the story about having to take all these plant botany courses, which I hated. I was getting a second human biology degree. I'm like, why the hell am I studying algae? But the thing about plant physiology is, let's say you have a leaf rotting in a palm tree, right? And you call a true arborist, a true botanist out to your house. They won't touch the leaf. They will core test the soil. And they'll say, you know what, Alvaro, there's no nitrogen in this soil. And they'll add nitrogen to the soil and the leaf will heal. And human beings are no different. We've just lost all faith in humanity and mankind. We put a lot of faith in chemicals and synthetics and pharmaceuticals. But the truth is that the body has an incredible power to heal itself and to thrive if you give it the raw material it needs to do its job. And so, if you start with the basics, all human beings need 91 essential minerals. We need 2 essential fatty acids. We need 8 essential amino acids. They're called essential because they're necessary for life. For the record, there's no such thing as an essential carbohydrate. I have this.
Got it.
They're not necessary for life.
There goes on my food.
Right. So, not that everybody needs to be keto, but people tell me that carbohydrates are essential. They're not. But so those are your essentials. If you start to become deficient in one or several of these, you will get the expression of disease. So for example, let's say that you're deficient in certain nutrients like methylfolate. Let's take that in your case, because it's likely what's causing your sleep disturbance. What happens in the human body is when we create mood or emotional state, which is what's required for focus and concentration, we make neurotransmitters from amino acids. So the main driver of mood is serotonin. Serotonin's made from an amino acid called tryptophan. the one that's famous for making you sleepy at
When you have
Thanksgiving
turkey
dinner.
at Thanksgiving dinner.
Yeah, so could a deficiency in tryptophan lead to a deficiency in serotonin, causing a deficiency in mood? Yes. And then we call this a mental disease or a mental disorder. We don't have a mental illness crisis in this country. We have a lack of mental fitness, right? Human beings don't have the raw materials, the nutrients, the amino acids, the fatty acids, the basics from our diet to thrive. And so we start to go outside of these basics to look for ways to improve our condition.
It's amazing.
Right? It is amazing.